Hi friends, it's Lisa Hetrick, illustrator for Gina K Designs, and I'm so grateful you could join me today. I am super excited about today's tutorial. We are going to do what I call flowy, flowy floral watercolor stamping. So all of these florals here that kind of have a little bit of flow to them, we're going to do that today using my brand new stamp set with Gina K Designs called Today and Always. So we're going to be using quite a bit of this stamp set today and really focusing on the florals and the bits that go with the florals to kind of get this flowy, flowy floral look and create some watercolor effects. Really simple, really super easy. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to get started here by talking about the color palette that I'm going to be using for this project. So I've got some Gina K Designs inks here, Distress inks, and some Wildcard Distress Oxide inks here. So I have Turquoise Sea, Grass Green from the Gina K line. I've got Mermaid Lagoon and Twisted Citron from the Oxides, and peacock feathers and crushed olive. Now, I've gathered these colors because they're really reactive to water, and I'm going to be using this mister here because we're going to use our stamps to create these flowy, flowy watercolor-like florals. And this color palette just goes so well together. I also have wild dandelion in here, which is kind of a wild card because I'm using that as one of the center pieces for the florals. But here's what the color palette in general is going to be for today's project. So you can see all of the colors here and they all complement each other very nicely. I'm not so sure about peacock feathers, but I've got it in there. I might end up using tranquil teal instead. Anyway, okay, I've got my favorite watercolor paper from the B Paper Company. Love this watercolor paper. And if you're interested in it, I have a link in the notes about this paper. This is my favorite paper for watercolor stamping and swatching of my watercolors. And it's just a great paper to use. I also have a piece of Gina K Designs cardstock cut to my A2 size, and I love this color, and I think it's going to complement really well with the turquoise sea because it is turquoise sea. So I've got the Gina K Designs Connect glue. Love this glue. Really nice glue for using with the watercolor paper, and it just seems to really hold that paper down really well without buckling it. So love that. Also have some fussy cutting tools here because yes, friends, there will be a little bit of fussy cutting because, I'm always fussy cutting and I really dig it. So we're going to have some fun here. We're going to change this up. This is the inspiration for today's project, but we're going to change it up a little bit. And I found these gems in Mustache that I'm going to use to just kind of add a little bit of sparkle because I'm not going to be using that sparkle paper as a layer. Frankly, because I really wanted to use it, but I can't find it. I've hid it from myself in my studio. So can anyone relate to that? You've got a really cool paper, you really want to use it, you've put it away, now you can't find it. So that's what's happened to me. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the largest flower in the Today and Always stamp set. I am digging this flower. Now these flowers were created with kind of a brushstroke feel, so kind of mimic the way I actually paint flowers, except that we're going to stamp them. So the flowers that I paint, I call them flowy, flowy florals. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do flowy floral watercolor stamping, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself and excited. Okay, so I'm going to start out with Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm inking up the stamp and getting it nice and super, super juicy. And the Distress Oxides, there's so many tutorials about the benefits of these inks, but what I really like about them is they are just, they're great to create these watercolor techniques. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a little mist to it, stamp that down. Now it looks great, but it's still a little bit too graphic to me. And I really want it to flow a little bit more. So I'm going to add some water to it And I'm just kind of shielding it a little bit here because I tend to make a huge mess with my water sprays. Now, what I love about this, and the distress inks would do the same, is that those oxides are really just kind of dispersing that color, and and I want to let that go. And I want to let the water that's on the paper just stay. So you don't see me going back in here with a heat tool and drying it up. I'm really just kind of working with what's there and just keeping it very, very flowy. Now I know this freaks some people out, but I really want you to give it a go. Just water is your friend when it comes to watercolor. Wherever the water is, the color will flow into the water. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this stamp up with um, some water. This is the Twisted Citron, and I'm just stamping it right down onto that watercolor cardstock that is already wet. So you can see that it's starting to spray, just kind of flow out a little further. And I've added some more water to kind of make that happen again. So I'm going to go ahead and clean off this stamp because we're going to do it again just to create this. I'm creating this like foundation background here. Now, you could just heat it and then it will oxidize, and then you wet it and then heat it and wet it and heat it, and those inks will oxidize. But today I'm using the oxides a little bit differently. They're kind of pigment-like, so I really like how juicy they are. And when you get them super wet and you put them on a wet surface like you see here, they end up getting really flowy. So you've got that impression of the stamping of the actual flower stamp, but just moving that water around a little bit, I'm able to get just these flowy, flowy floral effects. And this makes for great backgrounds. Now, I'm not going to lie, it looks like a hot mess right now. And at this point, this is where I hear from people saying, oh, I don't think I can do this. This is feeling very uncomfortable, but just keep going. Just keep going. I promise. Usually, everything I start and all my card tutorials look like a hot mess until the very end. Anyway, okay, so I have the Turquoise Sea dye ink here, and I'm going to use the Gina K dye inks to go over top of the layers that we have already created. So I'm going to take that Turquoise Sea and just put it right down there. Now I'm giving it a little mist because I want it to spread in that watercolor paper and with the water. And oh, look how juicy that is. So that is like supremo flowy floral right there. Now there was already water that was on the watercolor paper. And the key with using the dye-based inks to get this flowy effect is your ratio of water to ink. So if you've got a lot of ink and you stamp, you're going to get a little bit of the crunch of and the texture of the paper coming through. But if you just have enough water when you stamp, and water on the paper and water on the stamp, you're going to get this really nice impression background. And I really love that Mermaid Lagoon and turquoise sea together. Look at that combination of colors. I love it. Okay, so we're moving on. And now I've got the background stamp here, and I'm going to have some fun with this. In my original one, I kind of used the background watercolor stamp, the watercolor dots as a layering piece. But this time, I'm going to take advantage of what's going on with the paper now. There's water on the paper. I'm going to take these two dye-based inks, the Turquoise Sea and the Grass Green, and just ink those dots up and stamp it right down onto the piece of watercolor paper right now that's already wet. And yes, I am mixing the two colors right on the stamp. So I'm getting a different color combination when those two colors mix. So doing a little bit of watercolor mixing with the dye inks and just laying it down diagonally here. And because there's water on the paper, the stamp is dispersing. As I stamped it, the inks are dispersing in the watercolor. This grass green and turquoise sea combination are just gorgeous. Love it. And it's added this extra little bit of dimension in my layers here. So I've got 5 layers of things going on one layer of cardstock, of watercolor cardstock. And I really dig this combination of color. And it's a great way to use that background stamp it with watercolor techniques. Okay, so now I am going to move on to creating some of the embellishments. So I've got the 2 leaf elements, and I also have the center element for the lead flower that I'm going to be doing some overstamping. So let's go ahead and start with the leaf elements. And I'm just taking both of the leaves and putting them right up on my block, taking the grass green. Now you could use the distress ink, and here's where I hedged with myself about using the crushed olive, but I grabbed the grass green first because I just love it, right? And I'm just going to take the wild dandelion and oh, yes, I did. I just took the wild dandelion and added it a little bit right over top of that grass green, because what I wanted to do is when I hit it with the water, those 2 colors mix together and I'm able to get like a green gold. So I'm using the Gina K dye based inks to do a little bit of color mixing. And yes, it did stain the wild dandelion, but that's okay. I was able to get it off and it'll be perfect for my next go. Okay, so I'm doing some fussy cutting because yes, I always fussy cut my embellishments. So I went ahead and fussy cut those out, and I did dry my piece of watercolor paper off camera to get it nice and bone dry, because the next step is that I'm going to be taking the flowers and the fern elements, and now we're going to be stamping over top. And here's where I need to bring in the big guns here. So I've got Tranquil Teal. Didn't like the way Peacock Feathers was going to look. That shade of green was just a little bit off from what has already been created in my layers. So bringing out the big guns. Got the Tranquil Teal from the Gina K Designs dye based inks, and we're going to just use this color to stamp the main floral image right there on top of the watercolor cardstock straight up. So I'm getting this stamp nice and super juicy. Now, normally, I would bring out like the Misty or stamp platform and I would do it 2 times, because watercolor paper, you know, has got texture to it and it's going to take that ink in, and this is bone dry. So I'm going to go ahead and just mist it just a little bit, just a smidge. And you see I just hit it with just a little bit of water. And now I'm just inking that up and getting that stamp super juicy. And now I'm stamping right onto the watercolor cardstock, right where the water is that I just misted. So this is enabling me to get a whole lot of color and a color dispersion of those dye inks right there in the watercolor cardstock in one pass without doing it twice or 3 times or lining it up somehow. But look at that Tranquil Teal over top there. It is gorgeous. It is just the right shade of color to create that pop. So we've got all of these different layer looks going on. We've got the watercolor layers in the background, and we've got the layers that we're layering on top, and it's still just one layer of watercolor cardstock. So that's what makes it really fun. I think that that's really exciting. Anyway, and I get really excited about watercolor, as you know. If you followed any of my tutorials, I get kind of excited. So I'm glad you're with me and my excitement here. Okay, so now I'm kind of like in full negotiation mode with myself over these fern elements. So I'm inking them up with the turquoise sea, and I'm trying to just create a visually pleasing look here. And what I'm digging about stamping over top of the watercolor pieces that are already there is that when I take the dye-based inks and stamp them on there, they're kind of blending really well with the colors that are there. So you're getting, there's so much transparency in the oxide and the dye-based ink that you've got colors that are coming through. So you get the illusion of multiple colors happening. So between the turquoise sea and now I'm inking up with the grass green, I'm just kind of creating that lower right-hand corner graphic element that we've got going here with the big brush Tranquil Teal flower, and I'm digging it. Look how they layer. When they layer over top, they give you that look and feel of two different colors mixing right there on the watercolor paper, and it's really, really exciting. Love it. Absolutely love it. Okay, so I'm going to keep going here and just really creating that rhythm right there in that lower right hand corner. So that's kind of the graphic pop element for this card. And I really just kind of start looking at it and feel like I need to add another little something to the center of this flower. Kind of feels like a little bit of an empty hole. So I'm going to use some of the center portion elements from the Today and Always stamp set. I've got that rosette, and then I also have this really kind of crunchy little circular element that's really perfect as a center floral. So I'm just going to go ahead and ink that up with some wild dandelion and onto a piece of the watercolor cardstock that I have here, and just not hitting it with any kind of water or anything, just inked it up straight right onto the watercolor cardstock, and then going ahead and fussy cutting that out. So it doesn't take that long to cut out that little circle, and it just makes the most perfect little center embellishment for that flower. And it's also pulling some of that color from the upper part of the layer where we've got the distress oxide that has bled from the twisted citron. So it's just kind of pulling that color down into the center of that flower and creating like that focal point look for the center of that flower. So I just took a little bit of Connect glue and added it to the back, and I'm going to go ahead and add in use the Connect glue to add in my little leaves that I'm going to nest on top of this bottom area where the fern is. And it just creates that extra added layer of dimension. And I'm also really focusing again on that graphic pop element that's going on in that lower right hand corner. And it really does help separate the graphics that are coming forward on the card and then the layers that are behind, that are in the back end layer of the card. Okay, so I'm pulling the smaller floral from the set because I really want to do a little pop right up above that flower, just off to the left a little bit, because using the grass green and adding another color in here with this flower is going to help create a little bit of a triad look and feel from the leaves to the flower to the other flower, and just kind of round out this composition. So I've got it good and inky, and then I'm just adding a little bit of water to that grass green just to get it nice and juicy before I position it down. So I'm using that floral, one of the leaf elements there, there's like a little indentation, and just kind of lining up the two flowers to kind of nest into each other, and just hit it with a little bit of water just to kind of help that dye ink spread. And you got to do that kind of quickly because that dye ink does just dry really super quick. So I'm really loving the composition of this. We've got lots of different layers coming forward and layers that were in the background that are washy flowy florals. Now it's time to add the sentiment. And, you know, I really wanted to keep this simple because I was going to let this go without a sentiment because I think it would be an amazing card front without a sentiment. But I just took the word enjoy from the Today and Always stamp set, and I'm going to nest it right here next to the flower. But I'm going to test it first because the amalgam ink is a juicy one, and you don't want to push too hard on these little stamps because the words will just kind of get jumbled and bumbled together, the type. So I'm really digging that. Really simple, really clean. I just went ahead and put some Connect glue on the back and then added it to my turquoise sea card base. And now I'm just going to take these embellishments that I had in my stash, and they're just like little adhesive back crystals that I'm just going to add three of them, just in three little strategic places around this larger graphic element that I have going on here, just to kind of create a little bit of shimmer and pop to kind of finish the card off. And I'm really, really digging this card. Um, I say that about every card, but I'm always surprised at how things end up, and I'm really loving the way this card is turning out. So here's a final look-see at the card, and I'm loving all these layers, and it was so super simple to come together. And just kind of comparing it here to my original inspiration, I'm digging the second one. I really like the addition of the tranquil teal and adding the dot layer right on to the cardstock instead of adding it as a separate layer. So I'm really enjoying this. And it's super, super flat. So it's not going to create a ton of height if you go ahead and mail this card. So I hope you enjoyed today's card tutorial. Thanks so much for joining me. Please consider sharing the joy by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.